Good evening. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I'm so happy to welcome you all. Tonight we'll be with art historian Karen McWhorter. She's going to be discussing her illustrated talk, A Royal Connection from the Wild Northwest to Westminster. Karen is the Scarlet Curator of Western American Art at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Cody, Wyoming. So she's traveled to us all the way from Wyoming tonight, and so we're happy to have her here. She oversees the Whitney Western Art Museum there. She's a contributing author to this summer's exhibition catalog for our summer exhibition, Charles M. Russell and the 1919 Victory Stampede. This is the first time that these paintings have been brought back together in over 100 years, and we're so fortunate that the majestic artwork, truly majestic artwork, is just at our fingertips right outside these doors. So as soon as Karen finishes her talk tonight, you're welcome to stay and meander through the paintings. The program will be about 45 minutes, in addition to a 15-minute Q&A with Karen finishing her discussion. So we'll be in here for about an hour, and then the museum will be open an additional hour for you to peruse our collection and the exhibition. The store is also open, so we have the exhibition catalog for sale. Karen is here and she is willing to sign your copy if you purchase one, so don't hesitate to hop over to the store. Without much further ado, I'm going to introduce you all to Karen McWhorter.
All right, we'll make sure I'm on. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, I think I am on. So as Eileen is dimming the lights, I just want to say a couple thanks, especially to Eileen for coordinating this evening, and also to Emily Wilson for inviting me here and for welcoming me to Great Falls. This is my first time to Great Falls, long overdue. I was at the Denver Art Museum, now I'm in Cody, so I'm heading north and west as I go, and thrilled that my travels have taken me here to Great Falls. I don't know if all of you all know, but Emily and I used to work together at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, co-managing the Whitney Western Art Museum. So it's really a treat to be back together, and I'm just blown away by the special exhibition and by this museum. The treasures here are incomparable. I would encourage you all to come visit me and my colleagues in Cody. I know you all are Russell enthusiasts, and you may know that we have a pretty fabulous collection too of Russell and beyond. So tonight I'm going to discuss an unanticipated adventure in research. This adventure began when Emily requested the loan of the Buffalo Bill Center of the West's painting, When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance, for this wonderful exhibition. It's just outside this door, the first painting on the left. After agreeing to lend the painting, Emily invited me to contribute to the project further by writing an essay on our painting for the namesake catalog. My assignment was very simple. It was just to write a short piece on When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance, this beautiful painting. I discuss its creation, its content, and its ownership history. But in the course of my research, I ended up stumbling into a thrilling research rabbit hole, as I call it, which resulted in the rediscovery of one of Russell's most important Canadian canvases. I'm excited to share this story of recent rediscovery with you all, but firstly, I wanted to examine Russell's connections to Canada, his interest in Canadian subjects, his experiences around the 1919 Calgary Stampede, and ultimately the stories of how the cowboy artist's paintings wound up in royal collections. So let's begin by flipping the calendar pages back to the summer of 1888. When Russell, a young man of 24, was trolling the borderland between Montana Territory and Canada. What was he doing? Well, he was seeking adventure and subjects for his art. He discovered both of these things, as he said, quote, across the line in southern Alberta. Russell began his trip in May alongside two buddies from Helena. They spent 16 days on the trail headed to Calgary. They followed well-trod paths. They sometimes sought direction from Indian guides. They crossed swollen streams on horseback and by barge. They visited Northwest Mounted Police forts and camped all along the way. This picture I love. It's taken a year after that trip. He's just 25 in this photo. He then passed a lazy summer on a ranch near High River. He spent it fishing, hunting, and of course, painting. But according to Russell, he wasn't really, quote, doing much of anything. Many a Russell biographer has said that he spent the winter of 1888 to 1889 with the Blood Indians, but in fact, he returned to Montana in September, so May to September. He spent nearly 6 months in Canada. This is true, as he once wrote, "I went out north across the line and lived 6 months with the Blackfeet." But in fact, he lived in a simply appointed ranch outbuilding in High River. It was centrally located among many Indian reserves, so he certainly visited with Indian peoples but didn't live with native peoples. Rather, he was on a ranch. And again, fabulous photo, Russell at age 25. Russell certainly found the artistic inspiration he sought in Alberta, and it's easy to see why. The landscape floored him. This was the Old West with which he was absolutely enamored. Wide open spaces, ranging herds of bison, mercurial skies, it had it all. He was also inspired by the native peoples he encountered on the trail, among their summer camps, and passing through High River on their way to or from their reserves. Brian Dippy has said that during that first Canadian sojourn, Russell, quote, discovered an empathy with Indians. Harold McCracken, the founding director and curator of the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, he wrote that Russell's time in Canada undoubtedly had a deep and lasting influence on his attitude toward the Indian and their subjugation by the white man. Of that summer in High River, Russell recounted, "There's lots of Indians here. They visit us nearly every day." Russell's reminiscences of Blackfoot, Blood, and Piegan peoples especially would inspire many important canvases. Then there were the Mounties. Just a quick overview here. I had to revisit this history myself to make sure to reference these figures appropriately. The Northwest Mounted Police were established in 1873, and they were charged with maintaining order in the Northwest Territory. After 1904, King Edward VII conferred upon them a new honorific title, and the force became known as the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. After 1920, when the Royal Northwest Mounted Police merged with the Dominion Police, they were called, as they still are today, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. On that first trip to Canada in 1888, Russell traveled briefly with a roving squad of Northwest Mounted Police. He would base some of his paintings on these experiences. For example, we know that Russell witnessed mounted police officers escorting native prisoners. He depicted this scene in the painting, Canadian Mounted Police Bringing Red Indian Prisoners, 1888. Russell would go on to develop lifelong associations with several Mounties as documented in letters, like this one, to Royal Northwest Mounted Police Sergeant Ralph Selwood Kendall. This letter is dated 1919. He warmly inscribed another letter to Alex Godillot, "Best wishes to my friends, the go-alongs." From the early days, the Mounties were celebrated in popular culture for their diplomacy and their daring. Illustrations like this remind me of scenes from the legend of King Arthur. Russell's artwork featuring the Northwest Mounted Police also generally underscored these virtuous qualities. But I say generally because it's very important to note that Russell didn't indiscriminately admire the force. Notably, in an early encounter with Mounties, Russell became exasperated with one policeman's poor treatment of a native man visiting their camp. But generally, yes, Russell created heroes of the policemen on horseback. Between 1888 and 1915, Russell painted 5 major canvases devoted to the subject. The first of these was that early documentary-style painting, Canadian Mounted Police bringing in Red Indian prisoners. In 1912, on the occasion of the first Calgary Stampede, which hosted Russell's first exhibition outside the US, Russell was inspired to revisit the subject and went on to create 4 more major oil paintings. All was pomp and pageantry at that first Stampede, and the Mounties played an important symbolic role in the Stampede proceedings. Those 4 additional oil paintings made after 1912 and thereafter were these: Single-Handed, Whiskey Smugglers, otherwise known as Caught with the Goods, The Queen's Warhounds, and When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. The latter 3 of these were exhibited at the Victory Stampede in 1919. And they're on view here today. The artist's interest in Mounties is also apparent in his watercolors, in his pen and ink drawings, and illustrated letters featuring the famed patrolmen. Like this watercolor, the talk paper, pen and ink and watercolor on paper titled The King's Scout, and this illustration for Victory Stampede letterhead in 1919, and illustrated letters like this one to Ray Knight of 1924. So now I'd like to take a chance to look closely at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West's Mountie painting, When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. Again, this was my assignment for the essay for the catalog. Throughout its history, this painting has been variously titled Where Law Dulls the Edge of Chance, The Only Way to Negotiate with Thieves, Arrest of the Horse Wrestlers, The Intervention of the Law, and Hands Up. I think it's interesting to deliberate on the title for a moment. When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. When. Many of Russell's paintings included when or where in their titles, grounding them in a time and a place, most often in the past. In 1919, a reporter for the Saskatoon Daily Star quoted the artist as saying, "I've confined myself entirely to historical work. That is, I've attempted to record in the form of paintings what little I could of the old life on the great ranches in the northwestern states." Russell was working toward this goal when he painted When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. He crafted a scene that harkened back to his first trip to Canada and years before that. As I mentioned earlier, some of Russell's paintings of Mounties were based on events that he witnessed. When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance is a fictional scene. In it, he celebrates the cool collectivity of Canada's mounted police, who impose law and order in the wild Northwest. When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance is a signature storytelling picture in which Russell casts 4 characters. There are 2 Northwest mounted police, unmistakable in their uniform, and 2 suspects in plain clothes. The lawman at left stands tall in his stirrups. He holds his horse's reins taut and points a rifle toward the belly of his mounted foe. He wears a bullet-laden belt over his scarlet serge tunic, and both the signature stripe running the length of his riding breeches and the badge at his shoulder, these shine like gold in the slanting light. A second Mountie busily disarms a suspect caught in his partner's crosshairs. He leans over the saddle to slip a polished pistol from the suspect's holster. The policeman already has 3 rifles piled in his lap. You can see that here. And a cartridge belt slung on his saddle horn, right here. These are from disarming the suspect standing nearby. Now beltless, that suspect I just point out, he's forced to hold up his trousers and his chaps. With a furrowed brow, he looks despondently at the ground as his companion surrenders. The group of horses grazing in the background and behind the scene of capture may have instigated this mountaintop meeting. As the painting's alternate titles suggest, the 2 outlaws are actually horse thieves whose luck ran out. Details soften in the painting's background as hill beyond hill dissolve into pale blues. Rising from these receding plains, the Canadian Rockies glow pink and snow-filled sparkle in the setting sun. The foreground is a mass of vigorous brushstrokes in mostly flaxen hues, interrupted only in the lower left by Charlie's well-known signature, right here, and at the right by shed antlers. When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance is similar in composition to the earlier Whiskey Smugglers of 1913. In both paintings, mounted officers arrest and disarm culprits on the Canadian frontier, and the landscape plays a major role as well. As has been suggested by Brian Dippy, When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance may be humorously autobiographical. The artist possibly included himself as one of the wayward suspects based on his own experience. Back in 1888, Russell was complicit in a horse theft of sorts as he returned to Helena, riding alongside his friend B.J. Longgreen Stillwell, with whom he spent the summer in Canada. They're riding together, and Stillwell gallops across the border on a borrowed horse from the ranch at which they were staying, and he neglected to return it to its rightful owner. In comparing Russell's self-portraits with the detail from When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance, one can appreciate the slight affinity between the cowboy artist in the two images at right and the dejected thief at left. They have their Stetsons set at rakish angles. They have shocks of dark blonde hair across their prominent brows, these aquiline noses, and their hands at their hips with their elbows splayed, like Russell often pictured himself. The figures do bear a certain resemblance to each other. It's long been acknowledged that the center of the West's painting, When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance, was once owned by Edward, Prince of Wales, later King Edward VIII, and after 1936, the Duke of Windsor. The painting's regal provenance can be traced to 1919, the year the prince embarked on a royal visit of Canada. During this trip, the prince attended the Saskatoon Stampede, where Russell's artwork, including When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance, was on view. Several sources suggest that Russell met the prince at the Calgary Stampede, which is celebrated here. However, this does not corroborate with the prince's travel itinerary and known travel dates. The prince didn't make it to the Calgary Stampede on time, which took place August the 25th to the 30th. Rather, he traveled to Calgary after attending the Saskatoon Stampede, which ran from September 10th to 12th. The hope certainly had been that the prince would attend the opening celebrations for Calgary's Victory Stampede. Russell was enlisted to illustrate invitations like these for high-profile guests, including His Royal Highness HRH, the Prince of Wales. But rather than in Calgary, it was in Saskatoon on September the 11th that Charlie and Nancy Russell met the Prince of Wales. The prince then viewed the exhibition of Russell's paintings. According to the Great Falls Daily Tribune, Russell, quote, conducted a special exhibition for the visiting diplomats, and it was, quote, then that the Prince of Wales viewed for the first time the works of the Montana painter, and he expressed his admiration of the paintings in such a manner, even to stating that he would like to own one of them. The prince might have even specifically mentioned his interest in Russell's depiction of Mounties in action, i.e., When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. The prince was known to have shared Russell's admiration for Canada's iconic backcountry force. He called them, quote, marvelous, and, quote, a magnificent, smart body of men, and he commended their uniforms as well. During his 1919 tour of a Royal Northwest Mounted Police headquarters, he remarked, I'm interested in the history of the force. No new country has ever opened with less crime and less violence than this Northwest Territory. The Royal Northwest Mounted Police is a splendid force with magnificent traditions whose fame is as wide as the Dominion itself. I know the men of the force of today are proving themselves worthy of those traditions and will ever uphold them. So clearly he admired the force. Maybe he even mentioned his interest when he was touring the Saskatoon Stampede. And in 1920, the year after that royal visit, the prince was named honorary commandant of the force. So the prince visited Russell's exhibition in Saskatoon alongside new friend George Lane. You all may be familiar with that name. He was one of the Big Four cattlemen who sponsored the 1912 and 1919 Calgary Stampedes. Lane had hosted the prince at his Bar U ranch for several days ahead of the Saskatoon Stampede and showing him a grand time. The prince hunted, he fished, he played cowboy, sounds like Russell's experience. And it was introduced to Lane's impressive stock-raising enterprise, which interested the prince greatly as he himself engaged in cattle breeding in England. The prince was so enamored of the area that he purchased property adjoining Lane's Bar U ranch, which he would thereafter call the EP, or Edward Prince Ranch. His investment was well received by his new neighbors, who presumed he would visit his Canadian estate regularly, contribute to the region's stock growing industry, and hire local help. So how will the Big Four and the prince's new neighbors of High River, the citizens there, how will they express their appreciation to the prince for his investment in their community with the purchase of the EP Ranch? Well, how about by presenting him with a gift of a magnificent painting by Charlie Russell, When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance? Many factors contributed to this brilliant idea, but principally, the Big Four were major supporters of Russell. They were collectors of his work already. The prince had stated his hope of owning a Russell painting while viewing the exhibition in Saskatoon, and his affinity for Mounties was probably well known among Lane and the others. The Canadians hoped to gift the prince something uniquely representative of their country as a memento of the royal visit and in honor of the prince's new and deeper connection with the region. The gift presentation is said to have taken place at a celebratory event October the 10th or 11th, 1919. This was in Winnipeg, and this event was coordinated by the prince to thank his Canadian hosts. But in return, he received a gesture of thanks by receiving When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. George Lane, one of the Big Four, he had coordinated that gift. He had purchased When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance, and together with his fellow Stampede committee members and the citizens of High River, Alberta, they offered it to the prince. There exist several accounts of the gift of When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance to Edward, Prince of Wales. As a researcher, it was a lot to sort through, and thankfully much of this has been recently digitized, so I could put everything in order. But it was difficult to parse fact from fiction in this case. Some accounts incorrectly reported that the Prince of Wales was not gifted the painting, but instead that he had purchased it. We think that this suggestion is likely apocryphal. Scouring the extant research material, Brian Dippy and I, along with other Russell scholars, are assured that the painting was in fact gifted to the prince. George Lane had picked up the prince's painting from Russell's log cabin studio right here on this campus in Great Falls, following the Saskatoon Stampede. At that time, he also retrieved another painting, which the Big Four and the Calgary Stampede Committee had commissioned as a gift for the prince's great-uncle, Arthur, the Duke of Connaught. The painting was to be entrusted to Edward, Prince of Wales, to convey back to England. So he would take two paintings with him back to England. Only one was to be gifted to him, the other was for his great-uncle. The Big Four had met and befriended the Duke, Arthur, during his service as Governor General of Canada, 1911 to 1916. At the 1912 Stampede, the Duke and his family participated in the opening ceremonies. At the concurrent art exhibition, he first encountered and commended Russell's work, so they knew also that Arthur was interested in Russell's work. The painting that George Lane selected as a gift for the Duke had until very recently long been thought to be a watercolor, now in Gilcrease Museum's collection, the stunning painting, A Doubtful Handshake. So for a long time it was thought that Edward, Prince of Wales, brought back his oil painting, When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance, and this watercolor back to England. This is where, in the course of my own research, nagging questions began to surface. Why would they give the Duke a watercolor and the Prince an oil painting? And if it was a watercolor given to the Duke, why did it end up back in the States as early as 1927, less than a decade after it was gifted? So we'll circle back to these questions. But as you see there under the credit line information, it has a very clear provenance or ownership history dating back to the States to 1927. So back to the Prince for a minute. The Prince's royal visit concluded in November 1919. On December the 7th, the Great Falls Daily Tribune reviewed an exhibition of Russell's works at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, noting that the show's checklist would, quote, fail to carry two of his latest paintings, for the reasons that both of them are now on the opposite side of the Atlantic, occupying positions upon the walls of royalty. One of these paintings, When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance, is now in the palace of the reigning house of Great Britain, it having been presented to the Prince of Wales during his visit to Canada, while the other, When a Left Handshake is the Safest, is possessed by the Duke of Connaught. Most sources corroborated with the Tribune's report that the Prince took two paintings with him back to England. So again, based on extant archival materials, we are assured that the Prince returned to England with two Russell paintings, one for himself, the other for his great uncle. Upon receipt of his gift, the Duke wrote a letter to George Lane, expressing his appreciation for the, quote, excellent and very characteristic picture of the early days when the cowman and Indian were hostile to one another. He relayed his plan to hang the painting at his home, which was Clarence House in London, where he wrote, quote, it will ever remind me of the kind donors. The Prince may have hung When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance at Buckingham Palace, as the Tribune suggested, but the painting's tenure there would be very short-lived, if at all. As early as April of 1920, the painting was placed on loan at the Imperial Institute, where it hung in the Canada section, alongside photographs of the region's scenic beauty, maps, and collections representing the Dominion's wealth of resources from furs to mineral specimens. This is not the Canada room. I couldn't find an image of that, and I'm still searching for one to see if we can find installation images of our painting here in London. But instead, it's an earlier image showing what these imperial rooms would have looked like. They celebrated each imperial stronghold of the British, and this is the Ceylon exhibition. So the director, Wyndham Dunstan, corresponded directly with Russell as early as May 1920 regarding When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. He thanked the artist for his earlier letter, which gave, quote, such interesting information respecting the painting of yours, which was presented to the Prince of Wales in Canada. Dunstan reported further that the painting had attracted considerable attention during its 2 months on view. Interestingly, the Imperial Institute has gone through many iterations in its lifetime, and its records are very hard to track. So I've worked with folks in London to help clarify provenance and exhibition history, but we're still sorting that out. A letter from Nancy Russell confirms that both the Prince's and the Duke's paintings remained in England in 1924, writing, regarding Russell picture owners in England, among them are His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, who I know has one called When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. The Duke of Connaught has one, the title of which is Doubtful Handshake. So this may be the source of much confusion. We've heard it already in the paper and otherwise called When a Left Handshake is Safest. And now Nancy, who ostensibly should be our premier source, is calling it a doubtful handshake. So very confusing. It is possible that later, during the infamous abdication crisis of 1936, that Edward may have brought his painting with him to France, where he established a home with new wife Wallis Simpson. In 1936, at the time of his abdication, the painting entered the Duke's private collection. As Duke of Windsor, Edward retained ownership of real estate and personal property acquired before his time as king, including the EP Ranch and When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. This was really important for me to sort out because I wanted to make sure that we had clear title to the painting, that our painting wasn't really meant to be in London as part of the royal collection. But in fact, the prince, as any other member of the royal family does, retains ownership of their collection beyond their time as regent. So title is clear. I didn't anticipate going down that road when I researched this painting, so there were a few nerves, but I was really glad to clarify it for us. So we're in the clear. The Duke of Windsor's sale in 1962 of the EP Ranch was one of several efforts to relieve financial stress. This was caused by unsuccessful attempts at oil extraction on his Alberta property and a known extravagant lifestyle. Sometime between 1948 and 1959, the prince elected to sell another significant asset, the painting, When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. The painting was consigned with Finley Gallery in New York. We think that it probably was transferred from Finley Gallery in Paris to Finley Gallery in New York. We're sure that he probably had it with him in Paris when he moved there with Wallace, and then consigned the painting as an effort to recoup some funds and keep himself afloat. And I'm sure the Parisian gallerists realized that there was a much better market for a painting of Canadian Mounties in the States than in Paris. So it was probably transferred to Finley Gallery in New York, where it was then purchased in 1959 by William E. Weiss, a Russell enthusiast with connections to Cody, Wyoming. Weiss subsequently lent the painting to the center in 1976 and then generously donated it in 1978. Now, when you visit Cody, you'll notice as you're looking at the Russell paintings in our gallery that almost every single one of them has William E. Weiss in the credit line. It is all thanks to him and his family based out of Long Island that we have the incredible Russell collection that we do, much of which was purchased from Nancy Russell's estate. So you all will be familiar with that name when you peek through our gallery. So I pulled together this very basic map. This is my attempt at graphic design, just to show the possible trajectory of the painting, which started in Alberta, Canada, traveled with the prince, all the way back to England. It may have been on view at the Imperial Institute here before moving, possibly, with the prince to Paris when he moved with Wallis Simpson. And the painting was either sold from London or from Paris, transferred to the New York Gallery, then made its way all the way out to Cody, Wyoming, where it still is today. So though he eventually parted with the painting, the Prince of Wales, who would become the Duke of Windsor, enjoyed at least 3 decades of ownership of When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. The painting depicts a romanticized, dramatic incident unfolding in the Canadian wilderness. But unlike many of Russell's paintings of run-ins between the law and the lawless, no horses rear and no dust flies, no bullets penetrate the air. Russell fostered a glamorized vision of the Northwest Mounted Police, which would have appealed to the prince. I think very likely that George Lane and his associates knew well that the prince would be interested in a painting like this. The Mounties are confident, they're composed, the wrestler's arrest transpires in an orderly fashion. Russell's protagonists seem to uphold those magnificent traditions which the Prince of Wales commended. The end. Wait. No, it's not the end. That should be the end of my story if it weren't for Google. So, in writing the essay for Emily's catalog, I'd scoured the center's files related to our painting. I spent hours with it in the vaults, examining it with a fine-tooth comb. I perused primary sources, I reviewed a stack of books from our research library, and then, finally, as I customarily do, I also Googled the title of the painting, hoping to find newly digitized reference material or recent opinions on it. Instead, one of the first search results was a listing for a painting titled When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance at the Royal Collection Trust in London, England. The Royal Collection Trust is the Queen's collection. It's the Royal Collection compiled over hundreds of years, comprising many objects. So I paused before proceeding, wondering if Russell had created 2 versions of our painting, or otherwise if one of the two paintings, Cody's or London's, was inauthentic, that was a disquieting prospect. So I had done all this research, I felt very confident. One Google search throws it out the window. So I clicked on the link, and it took me to the Trust's online collections database, which disappointingly did not include an image of the painting, but it did list a physical description. The description immediately dispelled my initial concerns. So it's called When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance. The dimensions don't match with ours, and the description says it depicts a Native American and a white man on horseback, note, shaking hands, amidst a prairie landscape. But then also the provenance is confusing because it says it's presented to the Prince of Wales. No mention of Arthur here. So I'm thinking, how in the world do these two paintings have the same title? They're both ostensibly gifted to the Prince of Wales, and I've not heard of this other painting. I was quite confident that the center's painting was correctly titled. My research had turned up repeated citations of When Law Dulls the Edge of Chance as a Charlie Russell painting with Mounties arresting horse thieves. The title makes sense, and that it was given to Edward, Prince of Wales. I found many reproduced images of our painting with the title included. So here's one, here's another, and here's a third. Many of these are sources from Russell's lifetime, so I have to think that our painting is correctly titled. So having securely established the center's painting's title and provenance, I was left to wonder if the Trust's painting was not only mistitled, its provenance misattributed, but if it was a little-known Russell masterwork. My colleagues at the Trust finally sent me images of their painting. I was dying to see it. This was the first image that they sent, a really poor quality slide image that's been reproduced over and over again through the copy machine. It's hard to tell what's going on, but it's certainly different than our painting. They then sent me this, perhaps equally as bad, way overexposed. The flash is drowning out all of the composition, but again, this is not the same painting. They sent this image, which was before they conserved the painting. The conservation of this particular work was inspired by this project. And here is the painting post-conservation. With these images, I confirmed that I had not seen the painting in the C.M. Russell catalog raisonné. That's the most complete listing of known Russell artworks. And what this meant to me is that the painting was unknown to the foremost Russell experts, myself not included. The Trust images rather showed a painting depicting a man on horseback extending his left hand to a mounted Native American amid a prairie landscape. I recalled then, upon seeing the images, that those many historical references discussed a painting called When the Left Handshake is the Safest, given to Arthur, Duke of Connaught, the Prince of Wales's great uncle. The Duke's painting was repeatedly cited as being titled When a Left Handshake is the Safest. And now, having this image in front of me, I began to consider that this painting of a cowboy engaged in a left handshake so as to keep his right hand on the reins and ready to grab his firearms, that this was the painting gifted to the Duke of Connaught and fairly well lost to history. As I mentioned, according to my research, several modern historians had suggested that the painting given to the Duke of Connaught wasn't an oil painting at all, but it was a watercolor. A watercolor now in the collection of the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's the image that we saw earlier. But I couldn't draw the same conclusion. Things just didn't add up. Gilcrease's watercolor, best known as A Doubtful Handshake, like Nancy's reference, had a secure provenance in the United States. And further, this is what really did it for me. This letter from Nancy Russell confirms that the painting given to the Duke of Connaught was in oil, and the composition is similar to a watercolor titled A Doubtful Handshake. So they've just been conflated all these years, but until sources like this are digitized, this is at the Gilcrease Museum, it would have been impossible to parse out what was fact from fiction. So connecting all the dots allowed me to confidently propose that the Trust's painting was When a Left Handshake is the Safest, given to the Duke of Connaught in 1919. Russell had reinterpreted the earlier watercolor's theme for the Duke's oil on canvas painting, amending the number of figures represented, the figure style of dress and accoutrement, and the season during which the scene takes place. So just last month, my husband Mac and I had the distinct honor, well, we were both together in London, but I had the distinct honor of visiting the painting that I helped rediscover in England. I was invited to visit the Queen's Art Conservation Studio at Windsor Castle. I was telling Emily this story. I'd been liaising for months with the curator, the Queen's curator, Alex. I didn't know if Alex was a man or a woman. We hadn't discussed that, so I didn't know who quite I was meeting at the train station. But I get off at the Windsor stop, I step out of the train car, and there is this impeccably dressed woman who I knew immediately was curator Alex Buck. Alex takes me to the car that they've provided to us. We drive the short distance out to Windsor Castle, and we approach a fairly nondescript, low-lying building, but with windows across the entire facade and sunlight across the roof line. And this was after, of course, passing by armed guards at the gate. So this was my first view. And in fact, Alex had miscommunicated with the conservator, so we were locked out for a minute. And I stood outside. You can see me here in the picture taking a photo, because I'm so excited to see the painting inside the conservation studio. So here, when we finally did get in, here I am with the painting, super excited. This was the highlight of my professional career. So this painting was essentially little known to the Royal Collection. They didn't realize quite what they had, and its art historical import. It's very rare to find a Russell oil of this size these days. So I was just thrilled. Isn't it gorgeous? And I think, honestly, the images that I showed you earlier sent by the Trust are underexposed, so it looks much more like this, lighter in palette than that image. And the Canadian background is in the distance. The light is so beautifully depicted, like many of the paintings in the exhibition. See C.M. Russell's signature here. And it's a little hard to decipher, but 1919, the date of creation, is right here. So again, all the pieces are fitting together better and better. And then ultimately, turning it over to see the title, "Left handshake is the safest," on the stretcher bar in Russell's hand. And here is this gorgeous detail of the figures that I had been searching after unintentionally and then very intentionally for quite some time. So now more than 4,500 miles separates two paintings that were jointly purchased in Montana and thereafter traveled together from Canada to England. Their subjects may be distinct, yet both celebrate Canada's colorful history, a theme beloved by the artists who created them and the men who would eventually own them. Representing two of the best of Russell's works from the period, the canvases were chosen as the finest of offerings for two members of the British royal family, who each possessed an enduring admiration for Canada and for the cowboy artist who poignantly painted the region's storied past, Charlie Russell. Thank you all.